welcome back to Witchcraft and Voodoo. I'm Sable Aradia. I'm a Wiccan Priestess and a witch, and I'm here with my co-host.
Hi, I'm Lilith Dorsey. I'm a New Orleans-style Voodoo Priestess here in Brooklyn.
And today we are going to talk about ritual. So it's my turn to host, but this was Lilith's idea for a topic. So I'm kind of jumping in here blind, but that's fine. I guess basically the idea was to talk about what constitutes ritual in our various traditions and maybe what elements go into them, and perhaps if we have time, why we would do them and the purpose for which they are created. So okay, so I guess I'll start. Wicca has a very specific format. There are particular elements that are considered to be important for it to constitute a quote-unquote Wiccan ritual, right? But there are a whole variety of different things that you can do to fulfill those requirements. So I guess I'll break it down, right? To start with, the first step is, they're usually done at the same time. There's two steps, but they could be done in like one before the other or both at the same time. And that is cleansing the area and casting a circle, right? So the idea behind that is that Wicca has no churches or temples. We make them wherever we are. So we create a circle, which is thought to be a microcosm of the universe, and therefore anything that we do in that circle is a microcosmic sympathetic magic effort to create change or connection in the broader universe, right? So we often do cleansing with it. Now I'll break down the different things. My tradition likes to besom before we do anything else. A besom is a ritual broom, and you could use your kitchen broom, but most of us like to use old-fashioned, handmade style brooms, just because it gives us that feeling of connection with ancient folk magic, right? And we sweep the area clean of physical as well as spiritual detritus. And I think it's just a practical thing to do. Is probably why that started. Let's clean the floor and get stuff out of our way. But of course, there's that spiritual aspect as well, right? Another way you could do it, a lot of people in North America use smudging in place of besoming. And there's an argument that that could be considered cultural appropriation. I certainly wouldn't do it in the US right now, because the general feeling among the American First Nations is that this is a cultural appropriation and we shouldn't be doing that. But in Canada, it's different. In Canada, smudging has kind of become part of Canadian culture as an acknowledgement of the First Nations that came before us. And we tend to do it even before major, any major like gathering, or where different people come together to talk and be peaceful and make agreements or to celebrate, right? So now if I'm wrong about that, somebody please inform me, but that's my understanding of it as it currently stands. Another thing we might do to cleanse is asperging, and this is taking ritual water and splashing it about the ritual area that you intend to cleanse. And there are many different ways to make that. The traditional one from British traditional witchcraft is salt and water, which is blessed to the goddess in a particular way. But it could also be, oil you could use. You could use water with a little bit of a particular anointing oil in it. You could use blessed holy water, like whatever. And there's a million different ways to do it, right? So these are three of the more common ways, right? Then you cast the circle. As I was saying, the circle creates that microcosmic space that is an analog of the universe. And that's drawing a circle in the air or on the ground to delineate the ritual space. Now, the real magic of that comes in the visualization, where you visualize a barrier of different sorts. We're generally taught to visualize it as white or blue-white light, which pushes out negative energy. And we're also taught usually to visualize it as a bubble as opposed to a circle, right? Because it's protective in all directions. So that's, but there's different ways to do that. The traditional way is drawing it with your Athame or the Coven sword, and other methods I've used include sprinkling flower petals on the ground. I've used cornmeal. I've used drawing a physical circle on the ground in dirt. I've done a fire circle once and a circle of candles and another time. So whatever method of creating a circle is perfectly legitimate. I find that it works very well in conjunction with a lot of First Nations ceremonies again, because often they create the medicine wheel. And what is a medicine wheel other than a circle, right? Traditionally, the circle is cast clockwise if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, Dioso, right? But banishing and clearing takes place counterclockwise, Widdershins, right? Now, I understand that some traditions in the Southern Hemisphere do it differently. They reverse the directions because of the perception of the Earth's rotation, depending on where you are. And I think that's very cool. I probably would do that myself. So, okay, so after that, we call the quarters. The quarters are thought to represent the four directions and also the four cardinal elements of earth, air, fire, and water, which incidentally correspond to the four states of matter: solid, liquid, gas, and plasma. So I like that modern connection, so I think of that too. There are different ways to do that. Some people literally call the elements and elementals. Some people call the four winds. Some people, they have what they know as the guardians of the watchtowers, is a phrase you may have heard. And these are visualized to be different beings, depending on what tradition you're in. They could be individual elemental rulers. This is the most traditional one from British traditional Wicca. Well, Gardnerian Wicca, I would say. Alexandrian Wicca tends to look more to its ritual magic roots, and they consider them to be the four archangels. So, you know, it depends, right? They've been goddesses. I also have used a druid blessing, which just says peace in the four different directions: peace to the north, peace to the south, right, etc. Let there be peace throughout the whole world, right? Sometimes we bring it together with a phrase like "as above, so below," so that kind of brings it all into place. And I'm sort of writing about this right now, so maybe I'm I'm getting more long-winded than I need to, but my thought on it is that what we're doing is creating an axis mundi. This is a place where all the four directions come together, and it's the microcosm of the universe. So we're creating the center of the universe wherever we are. Now, after you've prepared the space and you've made it all nice and clean, then you invite the important guests, and that would be the divine, as you see him, her, it, or them. In Wicca, it is traditionally thought to be important to acknowledge a goddess and god, but there's also feminist witchcraft traditions which just acknowledge goddess. When you could just acknowledge a god, that's fine too, right? But in my tradition, we prefer to have a balance, and we refer to them generically as the Lord and Lady, or the Lady and Lord. Actually, it's usually the other way around. The lady comes first because she was here first, and from her all things proceed, and unto her all things return, as it says in our charge, right? So, and some traditions acknowledge her as the earth and him as the sky. Some traditions, the British traditional ones, actually have that in reverse. The goddess is the star goddess, and the god is the god of the earth that kind of, you know, he's born, he dies, he's born again, and he slums it with the rest of us, right? So, okay, so after you've done all that and you've invited the divine, which can take many different forms, I'm not going to get into all the details. You can call different goddesses, you can call just the source right? Whatever, if you don't want to commit to a specific deity, you can have everybody call their own specific deities that they work with, right? After you've done that, then you do the meat of the ritual, whatever it is you came there for, right? So this could be a celebration of the seasons, it could be an acknowledgement of the moon cycles, and that's when magic traditionally takes place, which in most covens is on the full moon, but not necessarily. And dark moons for, you know, banishing magic or hexes, right? The crescent moon is for renewal and warrior energy because it's also called Diana's bow, right? So different things, right? And, you know, it could be a rite of passage, it could be an act of magic, whatever it is that you're doing, you do that in that portion, right? Once you're done that, there's what we call cakes and ale, which is a lot like communion. There is a liquid component and a food component. Traditionally, it's cakes that have been made for the purpose, and wine, actually. So I don't know why we call it cakes and ale. But you can use ale, you can use water, you can use fruit juice. It's all in the symbolism you personally ascribe to it. I've used different fruit. I like fruit, actually, more often than not. That is what I will use for the food portion. The food portion is, I don't know, there's different blessings. They're supposed to symbolize the presence of the divine in the world and our connection to the cycles of nature. So some people say the food is for the god and the drink is for the goddess because it's in the chalice, you know, whatever, right? It can be the other way around. It can all be the Earth Mother's bounty, right? And you'll say different blessings depending on your interpretation. Right, and then like every good kid, now that we've taken, you know, all the toys out, we've played with them, we put them away. So we uncast the circle in reverse order, right? We release, we thank the god and goddess for their presence. We never dismiss them. We always say, go if you must, stay if you will, but whether you go or stay, hail and farewell, or something like, because we believe, of course, they're always with us, and we don't command them. If anything, they command us, right? So, then we release the quarters, and different traditions will handle that in different ways. Reclaiming and fairy and related will tend to extend the same courtesy to the elemental powers. Go if you must, stay if you will. More British traditional stuff tends to believe that the elemental powers are cool, but we're kind of on their level, and we invited them to this party. And if we let them stay, they might do things like, you know, if we don't dismiss water properly, the pipes might explode. So we send them home, right? We say, thank you for your coming, you know, thank you for being present at our rite. Return now to your, you know, earthly realms, harming them as you pass, hail and farewell, something along that line. And then we release the circle, which can be done again in a variety of ways. The key is to take down that sense of the visualization of the barrier. So however you do that, some people slice the circle open with their athame, some people do a Widdershins circle if they did a Deosil one to cast it, right, in order to take back the energy into the athame or the covered sword. You can take your foot and break up the rose petals or the salt circle, or whatever it is that you have, and you know, then we say something to the effect of the circle is open but unbroken, merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again. And that is our ritual format. And I'll shut up now, let Lilith talk.
That's great. No, it's funny. I've never heard anybody actually describe it. I mean, I've done quite a few, you know, rituals, but I've never heard anybody actually describe it like that. And I think, yeah, it was helpful because, like, I see a lot of parallels in what it is that we do, but in a different way. You know, like that's what we keep getting at when we go back and forth with these discussions that we've been having. You know, and I think that part of what we do, a lot of what we do, the beginning stuff, you know, like I'm thinking we should have organized this beginning, middle, and end, but a lot of the beginning stuff that we do is really behind the scenes. It's really, you know, before anybody even gets there. A lot of the cleansings and blessings and stuff like that are done beforehand, you know. And for me, it's a very, I don't know, it's a very intense time, but it's also a very calming time. You know, it's like things need to get done, but I'm in the zone for whatever needs to happen. So that's, you know, I've had other people approach me before a ritual or something and be like, hey, what's up? You know, and I'm like, no, this is not the time for the, hey, what's up, or any of that, or like, let's chat. Because it's almost like it's a liminal time. It's in between, you know. So the minute you start, I tell my God kids, like, I'll have the stuff there, but the first candle we light, which might be 3, 4, 5 hours before anybody gets there, that's part of the ritual too, because that's setting the stage. It's like has to go through all these steps that have to happen in order for it to become a ritual space and a ritual to be able to occur there, you know. So but
I think that's brilliant, and I wish we did something more structured like that. I mean, like, we might do some things like that. Obviously, if you're having a ritual at your house, you got to clean up first and set up the candles in the altar, which can serve that function, and it does for me. They used to have ritual baths before they would come, or say a smudging or a drum circle or an anointing. And the idea, that liminal space, so
yeah. I think so, you know, and I think, there's that. We do ritual floor washes. So, you know, that goes on the floor before we even start. I think that a lot of us do ritual baths in the sense that we, you know, if we're going to be, for my house, for example, which is a New Orleans voodoo style house, we wear our whites and we cover our heads. So like that process of just changing your clothes in that moment. Well, it's white clothing. You're not going to put that stuff on until you have to. But when it does, it really feels like a big change is happening for you, you know. So all these things, we do a lot of cooking, which I'm going to talk about later. But, you know, all of these things is like different stages of blessing has to happen. You know, I can't cook in my kitchen if it's dirty. I can't, you know, cook in, you know, the dirty clothes that I wore last night, because that'll have the energy. You'll go again into the food, you know. So I think but I think that's something that people don't understand necessarily coming from other traditions, because for us it's very intense and very important. And note to my God kids, that's why you don't show up 5 minutes before the thing starts, because there's a lot more work to be done. That has to happen before any of this.
Older traditions will have will either get skyclad or they will robe up before they start to, and I think there's a lot to be said for that, because once you take off the clothes or put on the ritual clothes, and I've done both and will again depending on what I'm doing, right? Then you're aware, okay, I'm leaving the mundane crap behind me now, and whatever was pissing me off before I showed up, not relevant, because I'm not there, I'm here in this space. But I found that doing more public work, it's very difficult to get people to do that, and they often show up in whatever they wore to work, and I find it more difficult to get organized as a result. I wish, again, that we insisted upon being a little bit more structured about that. Anyway, sorry, just going to my comments.
No, I will say that. And again, though, for my God kids, the one who didn't show up because he didn't have his clothes, better to show up than to not come just because your clothes aren't ready. But that said, you should have your clothes ready, and it does really, really help if that's what you're doing and that's part of the ceremony. And I think it's easy. You know, it's funny, since this is the Witchcraft and Voodoo, I'll mention my niece. We did the main closing ritual for New York City Pagan Pride, which was such an honor. It was so nice to be able to do that. And my niece got there, and she's a young little witch, and she says to me, she looks at me, she's like, why are you guys all in white and all these other people are all in black? And I was like, that's a perfect witchcraft and voodoo observation, you know, because a lot of witches do wear black, and we have.
Let's address that. Let's talk about that. Can I interrupt you and talk about that? Why do you wear whites? What does it symbolize? Because black actually has a symbolism too. So
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons that go into it. In a lot of as an anthropologist, in a lot of African cultures, the white represents dead. It's a funeral color. So for us, it's about getting closer. You know, the the last episode we did was on ancestors. It's about getting closer to ancestors and our origins. Some people theorize there's a story about Obatala where, you know, he's called the king of the white cloth, or the, you know, the ruler of the white cloth. And he goes on this journey, and he, you know, he doesn't stop when he just gets a little spot on the bottom of his robes. He doesn't stop when he falls down in the mud and his arm is all dirty. And then when he finally gets to the castle, they think he's like a homeless beggar person and put him in the dungeon for months. Because, and one of the morals of that story is that, you know, you have to learn how to keep yourself clean. You also have to learn, you know, humility. Just because he was the ruler doesn't mean people are going to know that. They have to look and see, and you have to look like you're the ruler. And I think that's part of the other messages. You know, some people say, you know, and a lot of times with possession, we'll get knocked down on the ground and we'll have to pick ourselves up. Anybody who's had whites on, keeping them clean is a spiritual struggle in and of itself. So I think that's just another level of devotion that we make, you know, in honor of the Loa and the Orisha that we're there to, you know, connect with and do rituals for. So those are the main reasons, I think. Yeah, I'm sure everybody has their own theory, but those are the main ones that I can see identified.
That's really cool. It's interesting because, of course, you know, a lot of people tend to associate white with purity and all that stuff, and that's not what it is at all, right? So that's very cool. Actually, it's more like that connection with the other world.
Yes,
right?
definitely.
Which is why witches wear black. That's what it symbolizes for witches, right? Is that witchcraft is thought, our craft myths say that we have been practicing in the shadows and in secret when we meet by the light of the moon because it's at night. And, you know, I mean, you know, you need the moon to see where you're going in the woods, but, right, it's still at night so that, because it's in secret, right? So it's yes. It's that liminal state that you're trying to symbolize by the use of the color black, right? You're at the moment before dawn, you're at the witching hour, you're at the space between the worlds, and yeah, connection to the dead and to wisdom is one of the things that you're trying to emulate. So, I mean, there's no hard and fast rules for ritual garb for witches, but that's one of the reasons why we tend to prefer black. So it's very cool that it's exactly for the same reason, really.
That's funny. That's so funny. I never thought about that. But yeah, it is. It is. There's a lot of commonalities there. Yeah.
Anyway, yes, go on. You've done
right.
all the preparing beforehand, and you've ritually washed the floor, and you're in your whites. And
you got your whites on. Then there's usually some kind of, you know, I mean, it's funny because it does go according to the elements. I don't know if that's just because everything fits into the elements, or that's we do it because we have to do each of the elements, you know. But we will usually do a water cleansing, which is usually Florida water. My Florida water here, or as you said, sometimes we'll do holy water. A lot of hoodoo practitioners do holy water, and that isn't necessarily in a circle, but it will be on all the participants that are there for the ritual, and it'll also be like beforehand in the corners, on the windowsills, on the thresholds, everywhere that again is a liminal space that's going to demarcate you're going to be inside this space. You know, I did a ritual once in a geodesic dome, so it was interesting to actually have to get every little triangle blessed and protected, you know, and we did it a number of different ways, but that's basically what you're doing. You're finding out places where people can come in, where energies can come in and out, and you're making sure that that's blessed so nothing unnecessary is coming in or out. So yeah, there'll be a water blessing, there'll be an incense blessing usually. We do use a house incense blend that my priestess made for me, so we like that a lot. Sometimes I'll go, and I always think it's good to get stuff from other practitioners that you respect too. So if there's somebody that I respect, I'll use their incense, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, we could be doing an ancestor thing and I'll use their success blend because we want success in our ritual, so that's fine. Or I'll use happiness because we want our ritual to be as happy as possible. So things like that. So even if it's a different, you know, use for it, I'll still find a way to use it for our purposes for what we're doing. So we'll do that. You mentioned sage. We don't really do sage. I don't like doing sage, not just because, you know, I am a Native person and I do find it disrespectful, but also, you know, it's really not good for pregnant women or nursing mothers or people with breathing problems. So I really like to remind people that just to be careful, even if they think they're okay from a cultural appropriation standpoint. You know, you don't necessarily know if somebody's expecting a baby or nursing or something like that, especially when you're in a large public space. And I think we really need to be respectful. So we will use, like I said, we'll use incense. Sometimes I'll use Palo Santo, which is I wrote a whole article on it. I'm not going to go into it now, but one of the things I love about Palo Santo, especially when you're doing any kind of stuff with people that are around, here's my Palo Santo, is if Palo Santo meets negativity, it will start to burn black. So if you look at it, you know, as the smoke is burning, you can see where different pockets of energy are. Somebody might be having a bad day, so they need a little bit more cleansing or something like that. So I really like Palo Santo for that reason, and I've been using it for probably longer than most people have. I mean, it's really been the big thing the past 5 years, but I've probably been using it probably about 20 years now. You know, I had a very dear friend of mine who'd use it. So we do that. And then again, there's earth blessings. The altars are set up. Those contain different elemental, you know, things. It usually contains an image. We were talking before about using images that are sometimes of Catholic saints, like here's my Oshun statue. Or, you know, so if we were doing something that had an Elegua, maybe it would have an Elegua head. If it was Legba, maybe it would be St. Peter. I have a key attached to things over here, so maybe I would have a big key on the altar, you know, for Papa Legba. So different symbols for the Loa and Orisha that we are honoring. We always do Papa Legba. Again, I'm sticking to New Orleans Voodoo, but in New Orleans Voodoo, we do Papa Legba or Papa Lebat, which is, you know, there's an interesting story about Papa Lebat was actually Jean-Baptiste Labat, who was one of the people writing the Black Codes, and he forbid any kind of ceremonies. So it was pretty much like praying, please don't come shut me down, big Mr. Governor man, while we're doing this ceremony, which I think is beautiful that this, you know, it evolved to include these things. Yes, we always pray to this ancient spirit, Legba, which goes back to, you know, the Dahomey Kingdom in Africa, but we also pray to this other dude who we don't want to mess up our stuff, whose name is kind of similar. So let's throw it all in there and make sure all our bases are covered. So, you know, we will usually do Legba. We'll do a veve normally, which is a drawing on the ground with cornmeal. I was always taught to do it double-handed so that it each goes into each realm, one for the visible realm and one for the invisible realm. I have met a couple of mambos from Haiti lately that tell me they usually do it with their dominant hand, and then they hold the bowl of cornmeal or flour in their other hand. So it's still balanced, but you have a working hand, like a positive hand and a recessive hand for that. So those can be as big or as small as you want them to. They're designed to go all across the ground so that people can dance on them and bring that energy up into their bodies. Here's an image of one if somebody wants to see. Here, there's the Papa Legba Veve. And then we would add other ones. If we were doing a love ritual, you know, for Erzuli Frida, maybe we would do a heart veve in conjunction with it. You know, veves are really very flexible. They're very vulnerable to the person making them and also the situation and who's going to be there and what energies are there. You know, I did a ritual once where the veve literally like turned into an icy hand and started clutching at us. We could all feel it while we were dancing on it. So it can get very intense. So we put it down, and usually that goes around. This is what I thought that you were saying was interesting, Sable, that there's this kind of, you're making a bubble. And what we're doing with the veve is sort of, it's making a portal, but it's in a circle on the ground, but it usually goes around the center pole, which is traditionally in Haiti would have been the one post in the middle of the building holding up the roof. So this is the axis that the spirits travel up and down on, the center pole, and then they radiate out going from the veve, which is usually in some kind of circular shape. So I think we're basically creating the same kind of global bubble for people to sort of exist in and spirits to come in and out of. And I think that that's an interesting parallel that we've got going on there. In addition to you don't have a center pole, sometimes people have a chain, because there's a story about how you can climb a chain and go straight up into the realm of the divine. So people, if they don't have space, you can use a chain. My priest used to have this Christmas tree stand with a barber pole stuck in it, which I thought was great. I was like, this is fantastic. We've done it with living trees, you know, so we've done it with lots of different things. So that goes on the ground, and then the ritual is ready to begin. Normally there's an order of service that'll be determined by what house you're in. Everybody's is slightly different. Some people will do ancestors and then Legba. Some people will do Legba and then ancestors. It's sort of like just a personal reflection, but pretty much both of those things are almost always covered. And then again, you would go through the Loa that were honored in your house. So if it's, you know, we come from a Mama Brigitte house, which is very, you know, concerned with the ancestors and the foremothers and the grandmothers and all of that. So whenever we do a ritual, we will call on Legba, and then we call on, you know, Oshun, because she's also very important in her house. And then we call on Mama Brigitte at the end because she's very important to us. And then we would have the part that was specific to the ceremony. I think the only other thing that I can think of that's really different between the way what you're describing and what we're describing is ours can go on for a really long time.
Oh, I don't know if that's different. I've been to some amazingly long rituals. It all depends on how much talking you want to do and how many different things you want to get done while you're in the ritual space.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if we have a lot of people, it can get very long because sometimes when you have a larger group that's meeting, it's not a coven. It's, say, you know, a local, like have been part of a group called the Congregationalist Wiccan Association, so we tended to do larger public ceremonies, right? So people would come from all over the valley, and we only see each other 8 times a year because it's, you know, a lot of distance to travel, so we only tend to do it on the Sabbats, the 8 seasonal festivals, right? So they'll want to get everything done at that time, you know, right? And sometimes that can go on for hours. They want to have like a blessing if, you know, a child was born, or they want to have, you know, their own acts of magic for whatever they're trying to accomplish, which I don't like doing. I don't think that's appropriate on the Sabbats. The Sabbats are the time where you honor the deities, I think, and the powers, right? So, but I mean, like, if you're only going to meet, you know, Wicca's practical, right? If you're only going to meet 8 times a year, well, that, you know, that's when you got, so that's when you're going to do it, right? But, you know, and on, right? So, yeah, I've been to a ritual that's lasted like 4 or 5 hours.
No, ours go on for like 12 hours.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, all right. You win then, because I was tired after that. I was like, okay.
Yeah. And that's just the ritual. I'm not talking about all the cooking and all the cleanup and all of that. Yeah. Yeah, 8, 12 hours, that's normal. That's normal because it's not, you know, you were mentioning, it's not really yes, we have the order of service and these things have to be honored, but then it's pretty much whoever wants to come down, you know what I mean? So any Loa that want to make themselves known or have a moment right there, and then they need to do what they need to do. A lot of times when the spirits come down, they'll do blessings or healings for people, and that takes as long as it takes. You know, if you've got 100 people, for somebody to go to each one and talk to them and do a healing on them, or you know, do some other kind of thing with them. And it's funny, I think some of what you guys accomplish with the cakes and ale, we also do in that moment. It's like, oh, well, this person looks like they need to eat this orange from this altar, or this person needs to get past the bottle of rum, and, you know, something like that. There's a lot of those kinds of little teeny moments that I think you're still basically taking the energy of the divine into yourself through these things, but it's more individualized as opposed to everybody gets it. It's more like, oh, this guy over here needs this, and this person over here needs this, and this one needs this. So and that goes on, you know, for as many priests and priestesses are there. Everybody has their moment. Everybody does their thing. We don't dismiss them at all at the end. You know, I've had people come up to me, oh no, it's 3 days later and I still feel good. Weren't you supposed to close the circle? No, we don't do any of that.
Right.
We just go as long as they want to go. And sometimes they keep going even after that. You know, that's just how we work with them and they work with us. And yeah.
No, that's cool actually, right? I think, I don't know. I mean, that's a significant difference. And that's something that I find myself wanting to know more about. Why do we approach these from these different perspectives, and I don't know, right? Like I don't have an answer, but I'm going to think about it. I might write something because that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it too is that there's a lot of training that has to go on before somebody gets to this point too, you know. So I've certainly been at things where people like were not really having a good time afterwards or something, you know, and they needed an extra blessing or something like that. But in a traditional house, in a traditional ceremony, those people wouldn't even be allowed into what most people would call the inner circle. They wouldn't be allowed to dance on the veve. They'd just be standing back along the tree line or something watching. So for the people that are in there and participating, it lasts for whatever they need it to do, you know. That's just how we see it. And there's techniques to make sure, you know, the Florida water, we also use things like cascarilla and other things so that to make sure whatever happens is what's supposed to happen in that moment. You know, it might be, was one story I love where I was helping somebody set up an Ogun altar and they tripped and their foot was all bloody, and I'd forgotten to give them the red palm oil, which is one of the things we use instead of blood. So it's like, oh, look, he came back all bloody. I forgot to give him the thing we use instead of blood, you know. But for him, he remembered it, and he remembered that lesson. And for him, he said that's how he had to learn that this was important. If I just told him, here's this stuff, it's supposed to be blood, he would not have listened to me, because he's got ADD. That's the kind of person he is. Nothing against people with ADD, but
I understand. Yeah,
to say that.
I've had some very ADD people in my coven, so I understand.
Okay, no,
I love people with ADD. They're so creative, but yes, sometimes they have to have, you know, or other, you know, other people as well.
Well, yeah, people need to learn the lesson the way they need to learn it, you know. So for him, that's how he needed to learn that lesson. So that's why I always stress, you know, we're praying for what we need, you know, because what we want might not necessarily be the same thing as what we need. All we can hope for is what we need. So that's what our focus should be on.
Makes perfect sense to me. And I think that we maintain a similar philosophy, right? Like, I mean, you know, we do magic for things we think we want, right? But there's always that element of, yeah, okay, but we accept that it's going to take the form that it needs to take, right? And I love that story about the you know, the palm oil and the blood, because we have similar things that go on, right? It's like you say, right? Whatever needs to happen is allowed to happen. And when it isn't, you know, when someone isn't doing that, because not every, like, because Wicca kind of admits everybody, and like the initiatory traditions tend to be a little stricter about this, the inner circle, like you described, right? And there is a lot of training that goes into going into that, right? It used to be you had to train before you could even, you know, be considered for coming, right? So, you know, here's all the stuff you need to know, and now you can come to the circle, right? But in practice, a lot of the Wiccan community and the witchcraft community these days, the pagan community in general, tends to be very, you know, whoever wants to come can come, and whatever, right? So when someone is acting as a ritual leader, I personally find that if they're not giving space for things to happen, if they're like, okay, well, you know what, we all have to be out of here at 10 o'clock, you know, right? Then it doesn't have any juice, right? Yeah. It's you might as well be on a church pew, right, listening to a very dull sermon. It just doesn't have any power behind it, right? You've got to give space for that, I don't know, Dionysian side of the mind, you know, that connection to spirit, which, and that's the only way you can really make it, right? You can't, the logical brain of facts and figures doesn't make that connection well. It's an intuitive connection. So you got to give it room. And if you're not willing to give it room, then, you know, what are you doing there, right? So yeah, ritual can vary in its length. Some really, I've got some stories like that too. I'm not going to tell any of them. I've talked long enough, but you know, that's the part of it. That's part of what I think you should expect if you're going to go into ritual, and if you're going to suspend your doubts and your reservations and be in that space, right? That's why we try to say people should come into the circle in perfect love and perfect trust, right? Now, of course, you don't automatically love and trust everybody who's coming to the ritual with you, but for this moment, while we're in this magical liminal space, we're going to, right? We're going to put aside whatever our nonsense is. And if we can't, maybe we shouldn't come, you know, right? Just be open to experience. So that's interesting too. And I liked what you said about the center pole, right? We don't, we kind of give a nod to that kind of concept in the as above, so below statement and the concept of the spherical universe, right? But I mean, we have all kinds of pagan traditions that have influenced Wiccan ideas about world trees, right? And world trees are how you transfer between the worlds. The Celts had a legend about it. The Norse had a legend about it. Yeah. There's, you know, the Buddhists have a legend about it, the Bodhi tree, right? And because Wicca is a very syncretic kind of hodgepodge of things, all of this have come together into a general idea of this, you know, tree of the world, right? That draws everything together. So, I mean, that's a center pole too, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
So, you know, again, there's these interesting parallels, right? So, no, that's very cool stuff. So, okay, so for what purposes would you get together for ritual?
Well, we have feast days where, you know, it's the different lower Orisha need to be honored. So we do those feast days. You know, in New Orleans, Voodoo, the highest holiday. Somebody asked me if it was Mardi Gras. I was like, that's hilarious. No, Mardi Gras is not the highest New Orleans Voodoo island. St. John's Eve was the big, you know, midsummer was the big, you know, day for Marie Laveau. That's when she used to do her head washings out on either the Bayou Saint Jean or Lake Pontchartrain. So that's the biggest day in New Orleans Voodoo. And we've done things here in Brooklyn to honor her on that day. And I'm happy to say that this year, me and all my godkids are going to New Orleans for St. John's Eve to be with my priestess Miriam at the Voodoo Spiritual Temple. So that'll be really nice. Yeah, it'll be really
awesome.
So, yeah, so it's just like a time for renewal, you know what I mean? It's a time where we do renewed head washings and blessings, which are kind of like baptisms to sort of reinitiate us into the tradition. And, you know, it's funny because I got into an argument with some Wiccans about this because I called it the darker side of solstice, because for us, it's all about the night. It's all about that this is the most intense night of the year. It's not about that it's the longest day of the year. It's about this is the shortest night that we have, where the powers of darkness are sort of the most concentrated because they have the least time. So for us, that's a big one. And then we do, you know, when we do initiations, we all get together and things like that, you know. And I think what I forgot to say before was part of the thing that when we walk into it is people have been training with songs, people have been training with, you know, drum beats, people have been training with dance steps, people have been training with, you know, cooking the right food or saying the right chants, and all of these things together are part of what puts them in the right mindset for this to happen and for it to happen effectively. So I think that those other things are little teeny things that people don't necessarily see. You know, I've said we did public ritual at Pagan Pride. You know, they didn't realize that we'd done it all these times before, and we'd had singing practice all these times before and dance practice, and we'd worked to create the veve art pieces and the altars and all of those things. So that's what has to happen in order for it to be successful, but people don't see it, and they don't even necessarily think of it as part of the ritual, but I do, because it's more important to me, because if you don't do that, it's not going to come off.
I agree with you completely, right? A lot of most pagans, general pagans, right, the ones who eventually find themselves calling themselves witches or Wiccans, come to it through books these days. Often they're solitary practitioners before they meet groups. I was no exception, right? So it's very eclectic. But I think there's a lot to be said for taking formalized training and learning to do things in a particular way, because it trains your mind and it prepares you for what needs to happen. If you're trying to figure it out from a book, you've got a guidepost, but you're almost like floundering to try to find, and if you find what you're going to find, which you can, you know, like I believe that I had a lot of the lessons that Wicca is supposed to teach long before I finally did connect to an initiatory tradition. But, you know, you stumble on them, right? And you can also make bigger stumbles in different directions, right? And I think there's a tendency among people to kind of, I mean, Wiccans don't like to have hierarchy. We don't like any idea of people in charge, right? We're all, you know, nonconformists and counterculturalists, right? So a lot of us don't even like the idea of this, you know, formal line of initiation and the teaching that the priest and priestess have gone through to learn what they need to know to try to teach it to you, right? So, you know, but I think there's a lot to be said for that formalized way of doing it, because then you know that it works, that you're getting what the training you need to get out of it. I mean, like, I like to say, okay, it takes about 7 to 10 years for somebody to go, okay, I think I'm a witch, right? And then, okay, I'm a 3rd degree initiate, right?
Oh, sure.
That's an average.
Yeah.
Right? So basically, it's the same time it would take to get a doctorate. So if you're trying to figure out how to get a doctorate in medicine by guessing which herbs are good for what, and, you know, taking a stab at dissecting the bodies, right? I'm sure you'll find out lots. Obviously, the original doctors did that, right? The original medicine people did this. This is how we have this information. Somebody had to do that, but it takes longer, and you can, you know, you can really make some missteps, right? If you've got a formal pattern, learn the pattern first, right? You can screw with it afterwards, right? That's part of the acknowledged right that initiatory traditions give their 3rd degree initiates. Okay, do it your own way, right? We trust you to know enough about stuff now that if you decide that this doesn't work for whatever reason, and you might think it would work better in a different way, go for it, right? So, you know, but if, you know, it's, yeah, you got to have the biology before you can study medicine, right?
Sure, sure. I always tell people it's like a recipe. You have to know what goes into it before you can start making it up and adding stuff and everything like that. And when you see people try and cook and they've never cooked before, they make some crazy stuff. It tastes like crap. Like, and I think that the other thing that I think being in this situation does is it allows you to see a wide variety of things. Even if you could solve all of your problems with books, you're not going to be able to then turn around and counsel other people, because maybe you haven't had those problems, or maybe you haven't experienced those situations. And by joining a community, you can say, like I just told you that story about my friend who did this, or my godson who did this, or my goddaughter who did this. That allows you to sort of have more experience, because no matter how much living you do, and I do a lot of living, you're not going to be able to experience everything individually just by yourself. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't.
That makes perfect sense to me. I think that eventually everybody, even if they are solitaries, are often driven to try to find community. And that's one of the reasons why you've got to test out this stuff that you've been reading about, and you've got to, you know, see if it works with other people. And I mean, it certainly drove me, right? It was a big driving factor. And that's a whole other story. We should do stuff on community sometime. But
yeah, there's another topic. We'll write that down.
Yeah, I will write it down.
Yeah.
Okay, so actually, you were saying you were gonna. Yeah. Okay. Right. I think I briefly covered the reasons we get together. I will try to give the really short, abbreviated version here, just in case. But okay, why witches get together? Basically, it's feast days as well. Only they have, they're entirely based on, well, more or less based on natural cycles. I won't say entirely, right? So we have what we call the cross quarters, which are the solstices and the equinoxes, right? And then we have the, there is a proper name for them, and I do not remember it right now, but they're considered to be the higher Sabbats, as it were, and those are the ones that fall in between, and they are Imbolc, the 1st of February, Beltane, the 1st of May, Lammas or Lunasa, which is the 1st of August, and then Samhain, which is the 31st of October. That is, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere. If you're in the Southern Hemisphere, it's reversed. When we celebrate Beltane in the Northern Hemisphere, the people in the South are celebrating Samhain. And when we're celebrating Midsummer, they're celebrating Yule. So, and these are considered times to connect to the cycles of the seasons and connect with the divine, and often to celebrate and feast and play games and just be together in community, right? A lot of them are based on things like, okay, the melting of the snow, or, you know, the first, second, and third harvests, or, you know, it's all stuff like that. It tends to have a very agricultural kind of association with it, largely because it grows out of folk magic and folk tradition, but not the other way around, by the way. Those who, you know, I'm very much a proponent of Wicca as a kind of a modern reconstitution of old ideas, not an old tradition that everybody else stole from. So, sorry. But, okay, so there's that. Then there's the cycles of the moon, right? It says, in the charge of the goddess once in the month, and better it be when the moon is full, you shall assemble in some secret place and adore the spirit of me, right? So it's a time to connect with goddess. The Sabbats in traditional witchcraft traditions as more, you know, like it's focused on the life cycle of the god, because he's born, dies, and is born again over the course of a year, right? The moon cycles are about the goddess, right? Now, that's not true, again, with every tradition. Some traditions are goddess focused. They do it differently. That's cool, right? But yeah, traditionally in the full moon, we get together. That's when the coven does acts of magic, when they, you know, try to connect with goddess. We might draw down the moon or sun, which is a form of trans-channeling, where we call the divine into ourselves, which is something that I'm sure you understand really well, and that might be something else we want to talk about sometime. But yeah, so, and that can go on for a long time. If you end up with a really powerful drawing down and the goddess has business that she wants to get done, then you could be there for hours, and, you know, that I'm cool with that, because that's what you're there for, right? And then otherwise, it tends to be rites of passage, right? So births, and we have something called a Wiccaning, which is basically a christening type thing, which says we ask our gods to protect the child until such time as they're ready to make their own decisions about what gods they want to believe in, or whatever, right? Which is not the same as we connect you to God whether you want to or not, right? So I think there's a difference there, right? First menstruation is considered to be a rite of passage where we honor a girl's passage into maidenhood. And I think that's, I love that. I think it's a very big deal. And I wish that we had that in a regular culture. So that was very important to me. Yeah. Okay. Marriages, right? Which if you do it the Wiccan way, it's called hand fastings, right? You know, cronings, where menstruation stops, right? Or you just decide, okay, I'm at that right age where I'm passing into that stage as an elder, right? Death, right? Divorce, right? We call that hand parting, right? So any of these things that are big life changes, we would gather outside of the normal times in order to do that. But yeah, so there's a lot of meaning in getting together. And I think that to a large extent, I've kind of withdrawn from my community over the past couple of years or so, and I think it's just because I was tired, right? Because it gets into a lot of that. But I always do my own private acknowledgements of the Sabbats and moon cycles. So yeah, okay, that turned out to be much longer than I wanted it to. But yeah, that's why we get together. Okay, now that I've done that, cooking. You said you would get back to cooking. I'm interested in cooking. What does cooking have to do with ritual?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, in all the houses that I've been in, you know, that cooking is really important, that there has to be food not only for the Loa or the Orisha, there also has to be food for the congregation. There's also a really big emphasis put on feeding the homeless, so that a lot of times when we're doing, especially public ritual, we'll make sure that part of the feast food goes out to the homeless people that are there. And if there's any leftover food, very often that goes to homeless people. You know, there's a Haitian Voodoo house in Philadelphia that runs a soup kitchen for Thanksgiving and feeds all these homeless people. So I think that that's definitely something that you find across all the different traditions, that, you know, yes, you have to make food for you. Santo houses too, now that I think about it, there's certain food for rituals that have to go to the homeless after the ceremonies are done. So it's not just cooking for, yeah, spiritual people, living people who are attending, and then homeless people who maybe didn't get there, or maybe are wandering around outside or whatever. You know, there's this concept of the holy homeless person, in the sense, like, it reminds me of some of those Christian stories I grew up with, that this person could be, you know, Jesus Christ in the street in a rough jacket, and how you treat him is going to determine how much blessings and favor that you get, you know, so that even somebody who was down on their luck, or who might not be the cleanest person, is also deserving of the best food and the best treatment. So I think that that's kind of one of the things that's behind it. I'm not going to say it's the only thing, but it's one of the things that's behind it, just sort of treating them that way. So there's a lot of cooking that has to be done. And then there's a lot of prohibitions, again, too, about cooking, like menstruating women aren't supposed to cook. And that's not a bad thing. You know, I know a lot of women get upset about that. What? You know, and I think that what's behind that is, when you're, as a menstruating woman, that's supposed to be time where you focus on yourself. It's not the time where you're supposed to be in the kitchen cooking for everybody else and the homeless people and their mom and their kids and all of that. It's supposed to be time where you're just focused on your own self and your own body's renewal and regeneration at that time. So that's why it doesn't have anything to do with that. So, but there's also a prohibition in some houses against, like, you know, you have to be clean, which is determined by, and I could go all night about this, but by taking a shower. So if you've had an orgasm recently, you have to take a shower before you go in the kitchen and cook. Again, cleanliness is probably behind that. There's probably some other things that are behind that, but that's just what it is. So, and then there's rules in the kitchen, you know, there's rules about which way you stir. Is this, are we trying to heal somebody? So then we would stir widdershins, and we would, you know, put other healing things in the kitchen while we were cooking. And then there's sometimes, you know, where we'll do cleansings with the actual food, in which case, which is similar to what we do with sacrifice. But if you do that, then you don't eat the food, you know, in the sense of, like, if you're trying to cure somebody of, you know, cancerous tumors, you're not going to eat the food that you use to remove those tumors. That food would go out and be left on the earth or something like that. But then there's other food that you eat for the feast. And then, like I said, there's food that's given away. And then there's a lot of food taboos too. You know, I remember once I cooked this giant Oshun feast with all of her favorite stuff. I had 3 Oshun priests and priestesses here. They couldn't eat a single thing. I was like, okay. I had forgot to, I made the food for the spirit. I didn't make the food for the other people that were there that couldn't eat that, because that was their taboo food. So there's a lot of cooking things like that. Yes, yes.
No, that's neat. Kitchen, you know, kitchen and food. This is another thing we should do.
Yeah.
There's a whole thing of kitchen witchery. I'm not gonna remotely get into it right now.
Okay.
But, yeah, but
yeah, we got 2 more topics.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's very cool, because you know, I mean, food is a way in which we relate to the community, right? I really love the fact that it's important for you guys to go out and, you know, feed the hungry in your community. That's, you know, like, we'll do that sometimes, but there's no, it's not expected, and it's not a regular part of the ritual. But I really like that, and I think that we should do more of that kind of outreach kind of thing. I think we can learn from that. I think that's very, very excellent. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the Christians have been doing it since the beginning, you know, with the Protestant supers and everything, you know. So I think that, why shouldn't we do it? It's the right thing to do. I'm not saying we should do it because they did it, but it's the right thing to do. So we should all be doing it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's excellent. I mean, people have done little initiatives like that in local areas, right? We had this thing called Guerrilla Pagan Outreach that it started in Vancouver. It spread here into the valley. We had a homeless crisis, so we were doing a lot of that kind of thing. But,
nice.
You know, we don't do it all the time, and we should. I think that's great. I wonder, coven meetings tend to be small, right? So maybe you can't do it for a coven meeting, right? But for a larger group, that would be an excellent tradition to put on a feast for people afterwards and invite whoever. That would be, yeah, I'm thinking.
That's good. Yeah.
So what do you think? Is there anything else that you think we should add? We've been here a long time now, but I love these conversations, and I'll talk as long as you want because I think it's fascinating. So,
right? I think I pretty much, I think I covered everything. I mean, there's just so much that goes into our rituals. You know what I mean? It's not just the food; it's the art in the veves and the art on the flags and the some of the ritual tools that we have, but again, they're all flexible and specific to the situation. It's kind of like, when you go camping, you pack everything just in case you need it. Well, that's the way a lot of our rituals are, because we don't necessarily know what Loa or Orisha are going to show up. So you better have the machete in case Ogun shows up, or you better have this other thing in case they show up, because you never know. So you've got to sort of cover all your bases, and then it just evolves based on whoever's there and what they need. Yes, you can have a structure to it, and we do, but there's so much room for whatever needs to happen is going to happen.
That's interesting. I didn't catch that the first time. That's a direct opposite approach, right? Because in witchcraft, we tend to go, okay, what are we trying to accomplish here? What's the purpose for this ritual? Okay, so who are the likely deities and spirits that would want to work with this purpose? Okay, now that we know that, let's contact them, right? So we tend to choose things that are very specific to the deities that we want to contact. Like if we're doing a Samhain ritual, we'll be focused on liminal deities and dark goddesses and gods of death and stuff like that, right? While if we're doing a midsummer ceremony, it'll all be like solar and light and all that kind of stuff. So it's very different, and we get that specifically, and we reach out to those powers in particular. So that's really, yeah, that's a cool, totally different approach. But there's many different ways within our structure that you can do that, and that's one of the reasons why we leave so much room for creativity, why there are so many ways to cast a circle.
Right.
Cool.
No, definitely. Yeah.
Well, this was fantastic. Yeah. I have had a great time. We've done a lot today. So.
Yay! Me too. I had a great time. Yay! All right. So, you want to close it out?
Yeah, we'll be back in another couple of weeks with another episode of Witchcraft and Voodoo. We do have a couple of topics planned, not just the one that we talked about, but we have a couple other ideas as well, and we will see you again in 2 weeks. You will find that video on Lilith's channel this time, and thanks for joining us.
Bye.